The countdown had already begun before anyone told Fleet Admiral Elena Reyes about it. She stood on the bridge of the Meridian, watching a blue-green planet turn slowly on the main display, and felt the weight of a decision that wasn't hers to make settling onto her shoulders anyway. 72 hours. That was how long the Galactic Council had given humanity to erase an entire world. "Say it again," she said. Slowly, Ambassador Voss Kalen's projection flickered on the console before her, the Thren diplomat's elongated features unreadable behind his usual composed calm. "The call directive is not a request, Admiral. Kepler Vantis has presentient life. Council law is unambiguous. The species must be culled before human colonization proceeds, or your species forfeits its claim to the system, and possibly its council standing. They're not just animals, Voss. Dr. Wright." Amara Chen's voice cut in from the science deck, sharp with the kind of exhaustion that came from a year spent living in observation pods above an alien ocean. "I've watched them build. I've watched them teach their young. Give me 6 more months and I can prove." "You have 72 hours, Voss said, and for a moment something flickered behind his eyes that looked almost like regret. "I did not write this law, Doctor. I only enforce it." The transmission ended. Reyes stared at the empty space where his image had been. Kepler Vantis had been humanity's first true discovery since joining the Council 40 years ago. A fragile membership, always on probation, always one mistake from being cast back to the edges of known space. The planet's oceans were home to a species the crew had taken to calling the Vantis. Sleek, silver-blue creatures that hunted in coordinated packs, built structures from woven coral, and, according to Chen's data, might be teaching their offspring something that looked disturbingly like language. Presentient, not sentient, not yet according to Council classification, which meant, according to a 10,000-year-old law, they were scheduled to die. "Admiral." Her XO, Commander Diaz, approached with a data slate clutched too tightly in his hand. "Command wants a status report before the Thren fleet arrives." "Then give them one." Reyes didn't look away from the planet. "Tell them we're preparing compliance." She didn't believe her own words, and neither, judging by his face, did Diaz. Down in the science bay, Amara Chen replayed the same 11 seconds of audio for the 100th time. A pod of Vantis, recorded 3 weeks ago, communicating across 2 kilometers of open water in a pattern of clicks and low harmonic pulses that her analysis software kept flagging as structured, not random, not instinctual, but grammatical. She didn't have the proof the Council would accept. She had a feeling, and feelings didn't stop planet crackers. She pulled up a live stream from the surface drones. Below the waves, a mother Vantis curled protectively around 3 young, her body pulsing with soft blue light. Chen had seen that pattern before. She was almost certain it meant stay close. Danger is near. They knew. Somehow they already knew what was coming. She sent the footage to Reyes with no message attached. None was needed. 3 hours later, Earth received the Council's final compliance order, relayed through the Thren command ship now entering the system, a vessel so large it blotted out a section of stars on the Meridian's viewport. Fleet Commander Braxis Thurn's voice came through moments later, cold and formal, congratulating Reyes on her cooperation before she had given any. "Your fleet will withdraw to a safe distance," Braxis said. "My ships will conduct the cull. Efficient, painless. This is mercy, Admiral, compared to what happens if a rival species finds this world instead of one of us." "Define mercy," Reyes said quietly. Braxis didn't answer. The transmission simply ended, the way conversations with the Council always seemed to end, not because there was nothing left to say, but because they had already decided nothing she said would matter. Reyes closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened a private channel to Earth, encrypted 3 layers deep, reserved only for communications with the Secretary General herself. "Ma'am," she said, "I need direction. The Thren fleet is here. Sterilization begins in 69 hours unless we comply first. I have a research team that believes this species may already be sentient, and no way to prove it in time. What are my orders?" The response took 11 minutes to arrive. An eternity, given the distance, given the stakes. When it came, it wasn't a paragraph of careful diplomatic language. It wasn't a justification, or a warning, or an explanation of the political fallout that would follow. It was one word, sent in the clear, unencrypted, as if Earth wanted every listening ear in the system, Thren, Council, everyone, to hear it plainly. Refuse. Reyes read it twice. Diaz, reading over her shoulder, went pale. "Admiral," he said carefully, "that's not a policy position. That's a declaration. I know what it is. They can't be serious. We have 12 ships. The Thren have—" He checked the sensor readout and his voice caught in his throat. 41. "Admiral, if we refuse, if we actually stand in their way, they won't just glass the planet. They'll consider it an act of war against the Council itself." Reyes turned from the display and looked at her XO, and for the first time in months, something in her expression wasn't exhaustion. It was clarity. "Sound General Quarters," she said. "Get Dr. Chen up here. And Commander. Tell the crew the truth. All of it. They deserve to know exactly what we're about to do, and why." Diaz hesitated only a moment before moving to comply, because whatever else he was a soldier, and soldiers followed the chain of command, even when the chain of command had just asked them to stand alone against 41 warships, for the sake of creatures that couldn't even speak for themselves. On the bridge, the lights dimmed to combat readiness, casting the planet on the view screen in a deep, bruised blue. Somewhere below those waters, a species that didn't know it was about to be saved, or doomed, continued teaching its young to sing. Reyes stared at the growing shape of the Thren command ship, its running lights sweeping slowly across the black like the eye of something ancient and patient, and felt the countdown in her chest tick down alongside the one on her display. 68 hours and 51 minutes remained before the Council's deadline. Her comm panel chimed, a priority alert, routed directly from the Thren command ship, addressed to her personally. She opened it, expecting another warning. Instead, the message was 3 words long, and it came not from Braxis Thern, but from an unlisted channel she didn't recognize at all. They already know. Before she could ask who had sent it or what it meant, every screen on the bridge went dark at once, and the silence that followed was worse than any alarm. The screens came back after 4 seconds of absolute darkness, and when they did, every station on the bridge was already flooded with alerts. "A report," Reyes snapped. "It wasn't an attack," Diaz said, scanning the diagnostics with visible relief. "Someone routed a burst transmission through our systems and it tripped every security protocol we have. Whoever sent that message wanted it to look like sabotage, or wanted to make sure nobody could trace where it actually came from. They already know." Reyes filed the words away. There would be time to chase that mystery later, or there wouldn't be any time at all, depending on what happened in the next few hours. She turned to the main display where Earth's public broadcast, now 3 hours old, was still spreading across every Council network that would carry it. The Secretary General's face, calm and unflinching, filled the screen. "Humanity formally rejects the Call Directive as it applies to Kepler-Vantis. We reject it as a principle. No species should be asked to become executioners as the price of survival. We are aware of what this may cost us. We have decided the cost is acceptable." It was the first time in Council history that a member species had refused a lawful order and said so publicly, on every channel, to every world that cared to listen. The reaction was immediate. Diplomatic channels lit up with outrage from a dozen species that had never once questioned Council law, each one more baffled than the last that a probationary member, a species barely a generation removed from its own homeworld, would dare to say no. Older species that Reyes had never even heard of sent formal condemnations. A few quietly, on channels that wouldn't be traced, sent something that looked almost like curiosity. "They think we're insane," Diaz said, watching the response feed scroll past. "Maybe we are," Reyes said. "Get me a tactical picture. I want to know exactly what we're facing before Braxis decides talking is over." The answer came back grim. 41 Thren warships, arrayed in a slow, deliberate blockade formation around Kepler-Vantis, versus 12 human vessels, Cruisers and frigates, none of them built for a fight this one-sided. On paper, it wasn't a battle. It was a formality before a massacre. Reyes didn't care what it looked like on paper. She ordered her ships into a defensive line directly between the Thren fleet and the planet, close enough that any strike on Kepler-Vantis would have to pass through human hulls first. Down in the science bay, Amara Chen worked through her exhaustion on pure adrenaline, running the last of her audio samples through every analysis model she had. She was so focused she nearly missed Lieutenant Marcus Idowu leaning in the doorway, young and quiet, watching her work with the particular stillness of a man who had already made peace with dying today. "You really think they're people?" he said. Not a question, an honest one. "I think," Chen said, not looking up, "that somewhere out there, 10,000 years ago, some other species looked at us, at humans, while we were still figuring out fire, and decided we weren't people yet either. I think the only difference between the Vantis and us is a head start." Idowu considered that. "My grandmother used to say the measure of people isn't what they can build, it's what they choose to protect." Chen finally looked up at him. "That's a good line. She'd have liked you," he said, and left before she could answer, because his station was calling him to the flight deck, and there wasn't time left for conversations that mattered less than the one happening outside the hull. Braxis Thurn's voice returned to the Meridian's bridge less than an hour later, and this time there was no diplomatic patience left in it at all. "You have positioned combat vessels in violation of a direct council order," he said. "This is your final opportunity to withdraw. I will not offer another." "We're not moving," Reyes said. "Then you understand what happens next is not my choice, it is yours." "No," Reyes said. "It's ours. Every one of us made this choice together, a long time before you arrived. We're not asking you to agree with it. We're asking you to remember that when this is over." There was a pause on the line, a strange, unreadable silence from a species that rarely hesitated at anything. "You are the strangest species I have encountered in 600 years of service," Braxis said finally. "And the most foolish." The channel closed. Reyes turned to her crew. 12 ships worth of men and women who had, every one of them, chosen to stay when Earth's order had given them every reason to run. "Battle stations," she said. "Hold formation. We do not fire first." The Thren fleet began to move. It wasn't a charge. It was worse. A slow, deliberate advance. 41 warships closing the distance with the unhurried confidence of a species that had never once needed to rush toward a fight it knew it would win. Reyes watched the range numbers fall on her display, each one bringing her fleet closer to a battle she had no rational way to survive. "Admiral." Diaz's voice was tight. "Thren weapons are charging. All of them." "Hold," Reyes said. Down in the science bay, Chen's monitors flared with new data. The ocean of Kepler-Vantis, visible from orbit through the drone feeds, had begun to shimmer with color. Not one Vantis, not a pod, but what looked like the entire visible population, lighting the water in slow waves of blue and violet that spread for kilometers in every direction. "Reyes, are you seeing this?" Chen's voice cracked through the comm, equal parts wonder and terror. "They know. They're reacting to the fleet movements. This isn't instinct. This is coordinated. This is..." Her words were lost in the sudden blare of the collision alarm. "Signal from the Thren flagship," the comms officer said, voice rising with disbelief. "They're not hailing us. They're..." The first shot came without warning, without a final countdown, without the courtesy of one last word. A beam of white-hot energy tore across the Meridian's forward shields, and the entire bridge lurched sideways as klaxons screamed to life. "Direct hit. Forward hull breach on deck 6, someone shouted over the chaos. Reyes grabbed the edge of her console to stay upright, blood already running warm down the side of her face from where she'd struck it against the display. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Diaz shouting orders, heard the ship groaning under a second impact, heard Chen's voice screaming something about the ocean that no one had time left to listen to. The main screen flickered once, twice, and then the Meridian took a third hit dead center on the bridge itself. The image cut to static. Smoke was the first thing Reyes became aware of, thick and acrid, curling across a bridge lit only by emergency red. The second thing was Diaz's voice close to her ear, shouting her name like it was the only word he knew. "I'm up," she managed, and pulled herself upright against the ruined console, ignoring the way her vision tilted and doubled. Half the bridge crew was already back at their stations, working through sparking panels and cracked displays with the grim efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this and hoped they'd never need it. Report. We took 3 direct hits, hulls holding barely. 2 frigates are worse off, Hawthorne's venting atmosphere on 3 decks. Diaz's jaw was tight. "Admiral, they didn't fire a warning shot. They went straight for kill strikes. Then we stopped being surprised by that and start fighting like it," Reyes said, and something in her voice cut through the chaos on the bridge, steadied it. "Diaz, decentralize command to squadron level. I want every captain making their own calls in real time. We can't outgun them. We can outthink them." It was not how council fleets fought. Thren doctrine, like every council species Reyes had studied, relied on centralized command, overwhelming force, and the assumption that no enemy would risk taking losses a rational species would consider unacceptable. Humanity's entire military tradition had been forged in wars where the numbers were always against them, and giving up was never an option anyone actually took. Braxis Thurn was about to learn what that meant. On the flight deck, Lieutenant Marcus Idawu strapped into his fighter with hands that only shook a little. Around him, 3 dozen pilots were doing the same, running final checks in a silence broken only by the muffled thunder of impacts against the Meridian's hull. "Listen up," came Reyes's voice over the fleet-wide channel, steady despite the blood he could hear roughening the edges of it. "They expect us to retreat or die in formation like every other species they've fought. We're going to give them a third option: hit their flanks, break their lines, make every kill cost them something they didn't plan on paying." Idawu launched into a battlefield that looked like the end of the world. Beams of energy crossing the dark in every direction, human frigates weaving between strikes with maneuvers no Thren simulation had ever modeled, because no Thren pilot had ever needed to fly like their life, and every life behind them depended on refusing to fly predictably. He found his opening near a Thren cruiser that had drifted too far from its formation, hunting an already damaged human frigate. Idawu didn't hesitate. He dove past its point defenses at a velocity his training had told him was reckless, released everything his fighter carried directly into its exposed engine array, and pulled away half a second before the cruiser's return fire would have vaporized him. The cruiser's drive core went critical 11 seconds later, blooming into a silent white flower against the black. "That's one," Idawu breathed, and didn't have time to feel anything else about it before 3 more Thren fighters turned toward him at once. The battle that followed didn't look like a battle the Council had a word for. Human ships took hits that should have ended them and kept fighting anyway, kept protecting the frigates behind them, kept closing gaps that opened in the line with a stubbornness that read, on every Thren sensor readout, as something close to malfunction. On the Thren flagship, Braxis Thurn watched his tactical display with the expression his crew had never seen on him before. Confusion. "They should have broken 20 minutes ago," his second-in-command said. "By every calculation, this fleet should be retreating or destroyed." "They are not retreating," Braxis said slowly, because retreating was never a variable they were willing to consider. He studied the pattern of the human formation, the way it bent without breaking, absorbed losses without collapsing. Increase pressure on their center, force the collapse. It was then that the sensor officer's voice cut through the tension on the flagship's bridge, tight with something that wasn't tactical urgency at all. "Commander, the planet." Every eye turned to the secondary display where Kepler Vantis hung against the stars, its ocean no longer the dark blue it had been at the start of the engagement. Now it burned with color. Vast, coordinated waves of bioluminescent light spreading across the visible hemisphere, in patterns too rhythmic, too deliberate, to be anything but a response. A response to the battle happening in orbit above them. "They're reacting," the sensor officer said. "The entire population, in sync." Braxis stared at the display for a long moment, and something in the set of his shoulders shifted. Not doubt, not yet, but the first crack in a certainty that had held for 600 years of service. He had culled presentient worlds before. None of them had ever done that. He said nothing about it. Instead, his voice hardened. It changes nothing. Continue the assault. Aboard the Meridian, Reyes watched her tactical display with grim focus as Diaz relayed casualty reports she didn't have time to fully process yet. The Hawthorne critical but holding, 2 fighters lost, hull breaches across half the fleet. They were bleeding. But they were still there, still standing between the Thren fleet and the planet below. And for the first time since the shooting started, Reyes let herself believe they might actually survive the hour. Admiral. The comms officer's voice pulled her attention sharply. Priority channel. It's Ambassador Kalen. Voss Kalen's projection flickered onto the display, and even through the poor connection, Reyes could see something had changed in him since their last conversation. The composed diplomatic mask was gone, replaced by something rawer, more urgent. Admiral, listen to me carefully. I do not have long, he said. What is happening down there? The light patterns. I have seen this before. In Council archive footage I was never meant to access. This is not the first time a species has done this in the presence of a cull fleet. Voss, what are you telling me? I am telling you the Council has erased this from its records for a reason, and I do not yet know what that reason is. But I intend to find out. His eyes flicked off screen, toward something urgent on his own bridge. I have to go. Braxis is bringing something out of reserve, something I have only heard rumors of. Admiral, whatever it is, your fleet cannot stop it. The channel cut before she could ask another question. Reyes turned to Diaz, dread coiling cold in her chest despite the adrenaline still burning through her veins. Get me eyes on the Thren flagship now. The image resolved a moment later, and the bridge went silent. Deep within the Thren command ship's launch bay, massive doors were grinding open to reveal something Reyes had only ever seen in classified threat briefings. A weapon built not to damage a planet, but to end one. A planet cracker, ancient and enormous, its targeting array already beginning to hum with power as it rotated slowly to face Kepler-Vantis. Admiral, Diaz said, voice barely above a whisper, we can't stop that. Nothing we have can stop that. On the display, the weapon's charge indicator ticked upward, one steady percentage point at a time, counting down toward an ending Reyes's fleet had no way to prevent. 40%. That was the number burning on Reyes's display, and it was climbing. Talk to me, she said. Options. I want options, not casualty reports. There aren't any, Diaz said, and hated himself for saying it, she could tell. But he said it anyway because pretending otherwise would get people killed faster than the truth would. That weapon has a charge radius 3 times the size of our entire fleet. We can't shield the planet, we can't intercept a beam that size. The only thing we can do is not be here when it fires. Then we're not doing that either, Reyes said. Down in the science bay, Amara Chen wasn't watching the tactical display at all. She was watching the drone feed from the planet's surface, where the bioluminescent patterns in the ocean had shifted again. No longer the slow defensive pulse from before, but something faster, more frantic, radiating outward from a single point deep beneath the waves like ripples from a stone dropped into still water. There's something down there, she said aloud to no one and then louder into her comm. Reyes, there's a structure. Under the ocean floor, 3 kilometers below the surface where the light pattern originates. It wasn't in any of our original survey data. It's not natural. Chen, I don't have time for archaeology right now, Reyes said, static crackling under her words. You don't understand. Chen was already pulling up a survival suit, hands moving faster than her thoughts could fully keep pace with. If that's what I think it might be the only thing that can explain why an entire population is reacting to us in perfect synchronization. I need a shuttle, and I need it now. There was a pause on the line, filled with the distant thunder of weapons fire. Chen, if you go down there and that planet cracker fires, there won't be a planet left to come back to. Then I'd better hurry, Chen said, and didn't wait for permission. The shuttle ride down was the longest 15 minutes of Amara Chen's life. Through the viewport, she watched flashes of orbital combat lighting up the black above her. Human and Thren ships trading fire in a battle she had no way of knowing the outcome of until it was already decided. Beneath her, the ocean of Kepler-Vantis stretched out dark and endless, pulsing faintly with light like something breathing. She brought the shuttle down at the coordinates the light patterns converged on, sealed herself into a pressure suit rated for depths she'd never actually tested it at, and dropped into water the temperature of an early grave. The descent took 20 minutes. She spent every one of them watching Vantis creatures gather around her in numbers she'd never documented before. Dozens, then hundreds, forming a loose spiral that guided her downward as though she were expected. At 3 kilometers, her suit light swept across something that made her stop breathing entirely for a full 3 seconds. Not coral, not stone. A structure, vast, geometric, unmistakably built, half buried in the ocean floor and stretching beyond the reach of her lights in every direction. Its surface was covered in the same bioluminescent patterns as the Vantis themselves, pulsing now in a rhythm that felt, impossibly, like it was responding to her presence. "Reyes," she said into her calm, voice shaking. "Reyes, are you receiving this?" Static answered her, and then, faintly, Reyes's voice, strained with the sound of battle in the background. "Chen, go ahead, quickly. This isn't a native structure, this is technology. Ancient technology, buried under an ocean that's been here for millions of years. The Vantis aren't primitive, Reyes. I don't think they ever were. I think something happened to them. Something that put a whole civilization to sleep, and I think whatever's down here is the reason." She pressed her hand against the structure's surface, and the light beneath her palm brightened in response, spreading outward in a wave that lit up the ruins for a kilometer in every direction. "I think they've been waiting. Chen, I need that documented and transmitted right now, do you understand me? Everything, all of it, send it wide, send it to every council channel you can reach." Her voice cut off, replaced by the scream of an alarm Chen recognized even through the muffled distance of 3 kilometers of water. On the Meridian's bridge, the planet cracker's charge indicator crossed 90%, and Reyes felt something in her chest go very still and very cold. "Admiral," Diaz's voice was barely holding together. "Firing sequence has begun. We cannot stop it," Reyes thought, in the strange, slowed-down clarity that came before the worst moments of a person's life, of her son back on Earth, 17 years old and furious with her the last time they'd spoken, 3 months ago, over a call cut short by duty, the way every call between them had been cut short for years. She hadn't told him she loved him. She'd meant to. There had always been more time, until suddenly there wasn't. Her hand found the comm panel before her thoughts had fully caught up to the decision. "Patch me through to Earth, personal channel, now." It took 90 seconds to connect. 90 seconds that felt like 90 years. And then her son's face filled a corner of her display, confused and half asleep, pulled from his bed in the middle of the Earth night by an emergency override he'd never seen used before. "Mom, are you okay? What's happening?" "I need you to know something," Reyes said, and her voice, for the first time since the battle began, cracked open completely. "I love you. I have always loved you, even when I wasn't there, even when the job took me away from you more than it should have. I need you to know I'm not choosing this over you. I'm choosing this for you, for the person I want you to grow up believing you can be. Mom, you're scaring me. Stay safe," she said. "Stay good. I have to go." She closed the channel before he could answer, because there wasn't time left for an answer, and turned back to the display where the planet cracker's charge indicator read 98%. "Diaz," she said, voice steady again, because braking was a luxury for later if there was a later. "Bring us about. Full burn, direct line between that weapon and the planet." Diaz stared at her. "Admiral, that will not stop the beam. It will just mean we're standing in it when it fires." "I know exactly what it means," Reyes said. "Do it anyway." The Meridian groaned as its engines screamed past every safety threshold, hurling the ship into the exact path of a weapon built to crack worlds in half. 12 human vessels breaking formation to follow their flagship into a line no rational fleet would ever choose to stand in. On the surface feed, still transmitting from Chen's suit 3 kilometers underwater, the ancient structure's light surged to a brightness that overwhelmed the camera entirely. And on the bridge, the planet cracker's charge indicator hit 100% at the exact same instant. Chen's voice tore through the comm, breathless, screaming words that were swallowed whole by the sound of the weapon firing. "Reyes, I found it. I found the proof. I found—" The transmission cut to silence. The screen went white. The white faded, and the meridian was still there. Reyes didn't understand it at first. The ringing silence where an ending should have been. The fact that she was still breathing, still standing, still watching a bridge that should have ceased to exist half a second ago. Then the damage reports began flooding in, and understanding arrived with them, sharp and disorienting. "Report," she said, and her voice came out cracked, unfamiliar. "The beam. Admiral, the beam hit us, but it didn't fire clean." Diaz was staring at the tactical display like it had betrayed him by showing something impossible. "2 of our ships took the brunt of it directly. Hawthorne's gone. Callahan, too. But the weapon's output was disrupted. Some kind of feedback surge from the discharge point. It fired at maybe a third of its intended yield. A third of a weapon built to crack a planet in half was still enough to have ended them. It hadn't, and Reyes understood, in the cold, clear way soldiers learn to understand loss, that the 2 ships now gone from her fleet were the reason the rest of them were still alive. They had thrown themselves into the beam's path and taken the worst of it so the others didn't have to. That was the choice they'd made, standing in formation, knowing exactly what standing there meant. "Kepler Vantis," she said. "Status." "Still there," the sensor officer said, disbelief plain in his voice. "Damaged. Atmospheric disruption across the impact zone, but the planet's intact." "Admiral, I don't understand how. That weapon should have—" "Chen," Reyes said suddenly, cutting through everything else. "Get me Chen. Now." The comm crackled with 3 agonizing seconds of static before Amara Chen's voice broke through, breathless and shaking but alive. "Reyes, I'm here. The structure. It did something. Some kind of energy discharge right as the weapon fired. I think it absorbed part of the blast. I don't have a full picture yet, but I'm alive. The Vantis around me are alive. We're—" "Stay exactly where you are," Reyes said, relief hitting her so hard it nearly buckled her knees. "Don't move. I'll get you out the second this is over." "Reyes." Chen's voice dropped, urgent. "Did you get my transmission? The proof before the beam hit? Did it go through?" Reyes turned to her comms officer, who was already checking. "Confirmed, Admiral. Partial data burst, sent wide before the connection cut. It reached every Council-linked relay in the system. Reached the Thren fleet, too. Reached—" He paused, staring at his readout. "Everyone." On the Thren flagship, Braxis Thurn stood very still, staring at a data stream he had not authorized and could not stop, spreading now through every archive and relay his ship was connected to. Buried images. Records marked with a classification level he had only seen once before, decades ago, and had been told at the time no longer existed. Voss Kalen stood beside him, and for the first time in their long working relationship, Braxis saw something in the ambassador's face that looked like open defiance. "You did this," Braxis said. "I leaked archive fragments to the humans 3 hours ago," Voss said, without apology. "I did not know what Dr. Chen would find beneath that ocean. I only knew the Council had erased something, and I wanted the truth in more hands than mine before it could be erased again." The data continued to spread, and as it did, the fragments assembled themselves into a picture Braxis had spent 600 years of loyal service never once questioning. Records of a precursor civilization, ancient, advanced, thriving across dozens of worlds, and records of its systematic, deliberate destruction, carried out not by rivals or conquerors, but by the earliest incarnation of the Council itself. The Cull Directive hadn't been written to prevent future rivals. It had been written to make sure no world like Kepler Vantis ever surfaced again, to reveal what had been done to the species that came before. Kepler-Vantis wasn't a loose end, it was a survivor. "This is fabrication," Braxis said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Council propaganda from rival factions designed to—" "You know Council archive authentication codes as well as I do," Voss said quietly. "You know what you are looking at. The only question left, Commander, is what you intend to do about it." Across the system, on a dozen other Council vessels observing the engagement from a cautious distance, the same question was being asked in a dozen different languages, by species that had never before had reason to doubt the law they had followed unquestioningly for 10,000 years. Diplomatic channels that had been condemning humanity's defiance an hour ago now fell strangely, uncertainly silent. Braxis made his decision the way he made every decision, decisively, and without room for a second thought. "The directive still stands," he said. "Whatever this world once was, it is a liability now. Ready the secondary charge. We finish this." "Commander." "That is an order, Ambassador. You would do well to remember your place." Voss said nothing further. There was nothing left to say to a man who had already chosen which truth to believe. On the Meridian, Reyes watched her sensors light up with a fresh warning, the planet cracker, damaged but not disabled, beginning a second charge sequence. Its targeting array shifting this time not toward the space between the fleets but directly at the ocean itself, at the exact coordinates where an ancient structure and a human scientist were both still very much within the blast radius. "They're aiming for the ruins," Diaz said, "for Chen." "Get her out," Reyes ordered. "Now whatever it takes. Admiral, we don't have a ship close enough, and even if we did, that fleet would cut it apart before it reached the surface." Reyes's hands tightened on the edge of her console, searching for an option that didn't exist, a way to save one more life when she had already spent so many to get this far. And then, on the long-range sensor display, something new bloomed into existence at the edge of the system. Not one signature, but dozens, then hundreds, translating in from FTL in a formation too large and too disciplined to be anything but exactly what it was. "Admiral." The sensor officer's voice cracked with disbelief. "Long-range contacts. Configuration matches." He checked twice before he trusted it enough to say it aloud. "Earth Fleet Reserve. 2nd and 4th battle groups. Admiral, that's over 200 ships." Reyes stared at the display, and for the first time since the word refuse had arrived on her screen, she understood the full shape of what Earth had actually done. They hadn't sent her here alone and hoped for the best. They had planned for exactly this. Planned for defiance, for escalation, for the moment the Council would push hard enough that humanity would need to answer with more than a dozen ships. They had kept the truth from her because the fewer people who knew, the safer the plan remained, and they had trusted her to hold the line long enough for the rest of the answer to arrive. The reserve fleet dropped out of FTL in perfect formation around the battered remains of Reyes's original 12, and for the first time in the entire engagement, the balance of power in the system shifted entirely away from the Thren. On the Thren flagship, Braxis Thurn watched 200 human warships materialize on his tactical display, and understood, with the particular horror of a man realizing too late that he had fundamentally misjudged his enemy, exactly what kind of species he had actually been fighting all along. "Commander," his sensor officer said, voice tight with barely controlled panic, "the planet cracker's secondary charge is at 90%. Orders?" Braxis looked at the display, at the arriving fleet, at the damaged weapon still locked onto the ocean below, at Voss Kalen watching him with an expression that had already passed judgment, and made the only choice a man with nothing left to lose, and everything already lost, still makes. "Fire," he said. "Fire now, before they can stop it." The charge indicator crossed 95%, climbing toward a detonation that would erase the last proof of everything the Council had spent 10,000 years trying to bury, along with Amara Chen and everything she had found 3 kilometers beneath the waves. 3 kilometers beneath the surface of Kepler-Vantis, Amara Chen felt the water around her begin to hum. It wasn't sound, not exactly. It moved through her suit and into her bones the way a struck bell moves through a table it's resting on. And she understood, with a scientist's mixture of terror and awe, that the structure beside her was waking up. The bioluminescent patterns that had pulsed gently since she arrived now surged into something bright enough to hurt, spreading outward from the ruins in a wave that swept past her and up toward the surface faster than anything should have been able to move through water. Her suit's comm crackled with Reyes's voice, tight with barely controlled panic. "Chen, get clear. The second charge is almost—" "I can't outswim a planet cracker, Reyes," Chen said, and to her own surprise, her voice was steady. "Whatever's about to happen, it's already happening. I'm staying to see it." Above her, on the Meridian's bridge, Reyes watched the planet cracker's charge indicator cross 98%, with the sick certainty that she was about to watch everything they'd fought for get erased in a single flash of light. Lieutenant Idawu's voice cut across the fleet channel, calling the newly arrived reserve fleet into formation, 200 ships surging forward to intercept a beam they all knew. Deep down, they wouldn't reach in time. The charge hit 100%. The weapon fired. And the ocean of Kepler-Vantis rose to meet it. Not water. Light. A dome of pure blinding energy erupted from the ruins Chen had found, spreading across the planet's hemisphere in less than a second, catching the planet cracker's beam at the edge of the atmosphere and holding it there, suspended, refusing to let it fall any further. On every screen across the system, human and Thran alike watched something that had no place in any tactical database, an ancient, dormant defense system, buried for longer than any council record could account for, waking up exactly when it was needed most. The beam dissipated harmlessly against the dome, and then the light began to recede, not fading but withdrawing, flowing back down into the ocean and the ruins beneath it like a held breath finally released. On the Meridian, the bridge was silent for a full 3 seconds before Diaz found his voice. "Admiral, the planet is intact. Chen's suit signal is still active. Admiral, she's alive." Reyes closed her eyes and allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel every ounce of the fear she'd been holding back since the word refuse had first arrived on her screen. What happened next didn't feel like the end of a battle. It felt like the beginning of something the galaxy had no name for yet. The Vantis, no longer merely reacting, no longer merely defending, began to communicate. Not through the crude audio patterns Chen had spent a year cataloging, but through the ancient structure itself, which translated their ancient, buried language into something every ship in the system could receive. The message was simple, and it arrived on every channel at once, human and Thran and every observing council vessel alike. "We remember what was done to us. We have been waiting for someone willing to remember with us. Thank you for refusing to look away." Braxis Thurn stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched 200 human warships hold position around a planet his weapon had failed to destroy, and understood that whatever authority he still carried from the Council meant nothing anymore against the truth now spreading across every archive in known space. Vos Kalen didn't wait for orders. He simply walked to the flagship's auxiliary comm station, opened a channel to the Meridian, and requested, formally and without hesitation, political asylum among the species he had spent his career condemning. "You didn't have to leak that data," Reyes told him later. Once Chen had been recovered from the depths and the last of the Thran ships had withdrawn under a council-mandated ceasefire. "You could have stayed quiet and kept your position." "I could have," Voss agreed. "But I have spent 6 centuries enforcing a law I never once questioned, because questioning it was never required of me. You taught me something in 72 hours that 6 centuries never did." He looked toward the viewport where Kepler-Vantis turned slowly below them, its ocean calm now. Its light settled back into a gentle, steady pulse. "You taught me that being right is not the same as being brave. I would rather be the second one from now on." Reyes found Amara Chen in the medical bay 2 days later, exhausted but insisting on reviewing her data instead of resting, and sat beside her without a word for a long moment. "You could have died down there," Reyes said finally. "So could you," Chen said. "You put your entire fleet in the path of a planet cracker for a species that couldn't ask you to." "That's not entirely true anymore, is it?" Reyes said, glancing at the drone feed still playing quietly on Chen's monitor. The Vantis, gathered now in vast numbers around the awakened ruins, their light patterns settling into something that looked, to every observer studying it, remarkably like a language finally being spoken aloud after 10,000 years of enforced silence. The call to her son came through that evening, and this time there was no emergency override, no rushed goodbye cut short by an alarm. He looked at her through the screen, exhausted, relieved, angry in the particular way that only comes from loving someone who had nearly died, and she let him say everything he needed to say before she said anything back. "You scared me," he said finally. "I know," Reyes said. "I'm sorry, and I meant every word I said, all of it." "I know," he said. "Come home soon." "I will," she promised, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she believed it. The council's reckoning came slower than the battle had, but it came all the same. The leaked archives Voss had smuggled out, combined with Chen's transmitted evidence from the ruins beneath Kepler-Vantis, spread through council space faster than any single government could contain or deny. Species that had followed the Cull Directive without question for 10,000 years now found themselves asking, for the first time, exactly what and who that law had truly been designed to protect. The council did not fall, but it changed, forced by the weight of its own history into reforms no one had believed possible a month earlier. And in the middle of that reckoning, humanity, a species barely 40 years removed from probationary membership, a species with 12 ships that had refused to move, was offered something no amount of diplomacy could have earned them on its own: a permanent seat, granted not because they had proven themselves the strongest fleet in known space, but because they had proven, when it mattered most, that they remembered why strength was supposed to be used for something. Reyes stood on the observation deck of the newly repaired Meridian, watching Kepler-Vantis turn slowly below, its ocean glowing soft and steady in the dark, and felt Diaz come to stand beside her without a word. "Command wants your report by morning," he said eventually. "They'll get it," Reyes said, "but not yet." For now, she simply watched the light beneath the waves, patient, ancient, awake at last, and thought of every choice that had led them here. A single word from Earth, a fleet that refused to break, a scientist who dove into the dark to find the truth, an ambassador who chose conscience over 6 centuries of certainty. "We didn't win because we were the strongest fleet out there," she said quietly, more to herself than to Diaz, though he heard it anyway. "We won because we were the only ones who remembered why strength is supposed to matter in the first place." Below them, Kepler-Vantis kept glowing, steady and unafraid, no longer waiting for anyone to save it, because for the first time in 10,000 years, it finally had someone standing beside it instead.